My 29 male, ex-fiancé, 29 female, cheated on me 4 years ago. I picked myself up and came back stronger than ever. Part 2. After interviews with many businesses, I was offered a position in the New York office of a prominent private equity fund. After I inquired about working in the London office instead, the managing director got me in contact with his London counterpart. After 2 interviews, I was offered and accepted a position at the London office. I was ecstatic. For many outside of finance, an investment banker who successfully transitions to private equity is seen as a significant achievement. To mark this success, I organized a little party at my apartment following my first day at the new fund. Owen Antoine and his so, Antoine had just made the transition to private equity, and his so worked at the fund I had just joined, as well as another buddy, arrived. I invited Alyssa to join us, and she enthusiastically agreed. She was the last to arrive, but when she did, she gave me a kiss and a hug and told me how proud she was of me. I closed my eyes and held her for a second longer, relishing the experience. We gathered around my kitchen's island, chatting, laughing, and having a great time. Jane had just returned home. It was 1 a.m. at the time. She could have had a busy day at work, but had most likely just finished sleeping with AP. We looked at the door to see who had just walked in, but we didn't recognize her presence. Everyone at the table knew precisely what was going on. When Jane returned, Elizabeth had her hand over my shoulder but didn't take it off. We simply kept conversing, not allowing Jane's presence to detract from our pleasant sentiments. Jane attempted to seat between me and Alyssa, awkwardly, to say the least, but ended up on my opposite side. We carried on our chat as if Jane wasn't there. I ignored her as well, keeping my body directed towards Alyssa the whole time. Jane seemed to be in a lot of pain, and I could tell. Everyone decided to leave at 2 p.m. to go home and sleep. I unlocked the door and let everyone out before putting on my shoes and following them. Jane, with a worried tone in her voice, inquired as to where I was heading. "I'll be back in a minute," I said, closing the door before she could answer. When I awoke at 8 a.m., Alyssa was still sleeping next to me, so I kissed her on the cheek and went home to carry out the last part of my new plan. I had turned off my phone before going to bed, since it was inundated with text messages and phone calls from Jane. Jane was sitting on the island looking sad when I arrived home, her eyes and nose red from weeping. My heart would have crushed for her if this had happened before she betrayed me, and I would have done everything to cheer her up. But after what she'd done, I felt nothing, not even pity. "What were you doing?" she inquired. "I fell asleep in the vehicle," I said. I didn't own a car, but I didn't care if my replies were illegible at the time. Must clean up and go to work. I then entered the shower. I got out and put on my suit, realizing that she needed to be at peace before leaving for work, and she couldn't be at home if my plan was to succeed. I exited the room fully clothed, approached Jane, and softly put my palm on her face. "Look," I said softly, staring into her eyes, "I have to go to work now, but I promise I'll come home earlier today to speak about this, okay?" I then softly kissed her forehead and told her I loved her. That was the only fake sincere kiss I ever gave her, and I was relieved that I wouldn't have to do it again. The last element of my new plan was to move out and ghost her, but instead of going to New York, I would be moving into a new and significantly more luxury flat in an affluent neighborhood in the city center that I had acquired the previous week. I had taken a day off from work to relocate since weekdays were when Jane was gone from home the longest and most consistently. I had breakfast with Owen and Antoine at a neighboring eatery. They too had taken a day to help me out. When we were finished, I checked her position on my phone, and she was, indeed, at work. We returned to my previous apartment, loaded all of my belongings that I hadn't transferred to Owen's place into his vehicle, and drove away. I was sorry to leave the apartment I had called home for the previous 3 years, but this was a fresh beginning, and change isn't always easy. The former flat's lease was in my name, and it was set to expire in 2 months. But with my new wage, 2 months' rent at the previous place was nothing. Besides, paying 2 months' rent to see my traitorous fiancé's life fall apart was a steal. Life was fantastic when I moved out. My new work was fantastic, and I was having a great time. I suddenly had a lot more spare time. I resumed boxing on a regular basis and was able to sleep at night. My friends claimed I looked better and happier, and I agreed. Alyssa and I made our relationship official, and we were quite happy together. She even got an opportunity to join a separate private equity firm right out of school, which is quite an accomplishment. I can honestly say that I was happier than I had been since graduating from high school. Jane, on the other hand, took my absence like an uppercut to the chin from which she could not recover for a long time. At one point, she hounded all of my pals with texts and phone calls inquiring about me. I had prohibited her from using my phone, social media, and so on. She still had the engagement ring I gave her, but asking for it back wouldn't have given me much of an advantage. I never found out about her connection with AP, nor did I care what happened to them. He could have her if he wanted to. Trash is usually piled together in a heap. After a morning meeting, I was coming back to my desk when I was confronted by an unwelcome visitor, an enraged Jane standing between me and my cubicle. She came forward and began hitting me, streams of expletives and fury erupting from her lips as she attempted to smack me across the face, but I easily dodged her blows. Chiara, my cubicle companion, and another coworker quickly restrained her. I was so concerned, she sobbed as she sank to her knees. "I've missed you. Where have you gone? I adore you. How could you do such a thing to me?" I casually got out my phone, played the footage of her and AP getting it on, and shoved it in her face. When I think about it now, I still find myself chuckling at the expression of dread on her face. She began to hyperventilate. "Look," she said between her hard breathing. "That's not what it appears to be." I couldn't help but giggle when I saw the timeline. It's not what it seems to be. It was obvious that she was being dodged by someone other than her fiancé. I wanted to shout at her and smear all the nonsense she'd done to me in her face. But in fact, it would come off as me attempting to persuade her that she had done something heinous. She was fully aware that she had made a huge mistake, and the guilt was already devouring her. Take a look at me," she said quietly. "I love you, and I will always love you, as long as the sky is blue. The sky is constantly gloomy in London." I replied with a straight face and a smug tone. Chiara stifled a chuckle like covering her lips with her palm. Jane's tears continued unabated as security intervened and escorted her out of the office. Jane received another dose of karma less than 1 hour later. I had planned to meet Alyssa for lunch. She was already waiting for me when I arrived at my building's lobby. We kissed, then went hand in hand towards the exit, directly into Jane's puzzled expression. We were all looking at each other during an uncomfortable moment. Jane then fell to her knees, again, and began sobbing, probably simply envious that I'd abandoned her for someone considerably more gorgeous, or perhaps played with remorse and sorrow. I'd never know, and honestly, I don't care. We just sidestepped her and moved out into the open. The remainder of Jane's narrative revolves on her engagement and her friends and family. But that's a story for another day. Life is still fantastic for me. I was promoted to VP, Vice President, at my fund last month, and I'm on course to become a partner by the age of 40. Hopefully. Alyssa is now my new fiancée. I proposed to her last summer, and she accepted with tears. We adore one another. We want to marry when the epidemic is over and are already discussing having children together. The new lockdown is terrible for everyone, but we are really lucky to have each other to rely on during such difficult times. That concludes my narrative, gentlemen. I simply wanted to share this to illustrate that if you've been the victim of infidelity, it's not the end of the world. You can always bounce back, level up, and hit new highs you never thought imaginable. Everyone have a wonderful day.